His car was worth $300,000. The suit, custom-made in Milan, came close to $20,000. The watch on his wrist, the one he spun with his thumb as he walked down the hallway, was worth more than her entire year's salary. And James Caldwell walked past Margaret Cole as if she were part of the floor she was cleaning. His shoulder hit the bucket with full force. Dirty water went everywhere. Across her uniform, her hands, the freshly cleaned floor. He stopped, turned, and looked her up and down with those eyes that had intimidated judges, prosecutors, and CEOs across 42 states. Then said, loud enough for the 4 interns and 3 attorneys passing through the hallway to hear every word, "This is a federal courthouse, not a car wash. Get this mess out of my way before I have you fired." She didn't respond. She bent down slowly, picked up the bucket, wrung the mop, and went back to work. Her name was Margaret Cole, and in 6 hours, James Caldwell would discover that he had just humiliated the one person in the world he could not afford to have against him. Subscribe right now and hit the bell. You need to see where this story goes. Margaret Cole was 58 years old, and she had been carrying 30 of them inside the law. At 23, she was the first black woman in her family to enter law school. She paid for all 4 years working 2 jobs and a partial scholarship that covered less than half. At 26, she passed the bar exam with the second highest score in the state that year. At 32, she was a federal prosecutor, with a conviction rate that made other prosecutors quietly ask what her secret was. There was no secret. There was preparation. There was detail. There was the absolute conviction that the law existed to protect those who had nothing left but it. At 41, she was appointed substitute federal judge. At 46, she requested leave. Her husband. 22 years together. The diagnosis came on a routine exam on a Tuesday afternoon that looked exactly like every other Tuesday. 2 years. She stayed by his side every single day of those 2 years. When he was gone, she sat in the apartment for 3 weeks without being able to leave. Then she got up, because it was what he would have asked. The legal world, she discovered, did not wait for anyone. The appointments had changed, the contacts had gone cold. Those who had promised support when she needed it found reasons not to answer the phone. 2 years away was too long for a system that never stopped. There was one vacancy, one appointment under review by the Federal Judiciary Council. But while the answer didn't come, the bills arrived every month. So she did what nobody expected. She applied for a job at the courthouse, not because she needed the money above everything else, but because she needed to be inside. She needed to hear the cases through the hallways. She needed to remember the smell of that place, the weight of those walls, the sound of footsteps carrying the burden of a decision. And she needed to see, up close, in uniform, without a name embroidered on a robe, how that courthouse treated the invisible people. The council's answer would come in days. She just needed to wait. James Caldwell was 44 years old, $412 million declared dollars, and a client waiting list that included 2 governors, a private hospital network, and the 4th largest pharmaceutical company in the country. He had never lost a case. 141 cases, 0 defeats. It wasn't coincidence. Caldwell was the kind of attorney who arrived at a courthouse having studied each judge more thoroughly than any biographer ever had. He knew which arguments worked with whom. He knew when to press and when to pull back. He knew that every person had a weak point, and he knew exactly how to find it before walking through the door. But there was something more. Caldwell had enough money to make problems disappear before they became problems, and he had cultivated that ability with the same care he cultivated his reputation. It was a Thursday morning. Caldwell was coming out of a strategy meeting with his team, 7 attorneys, 3 assistants, 2 hired experts, for the most important case of the year. Hartwell Pharma, 42 patients, 5 deaths, documents the company had chosen not to present to the FDA. The trial started in 3 days, and Caldwell had won worse cases than this one. The hallway was wet. There was a yellow warning cone. There was a bucket. There was Margaret on her knees scrubbing a dark stain near the side wall. Caldwell saw none of it. Head full of numbers, witnesses and strategies, phone in hand, the quick steps of someone who has no time. His shoulder hit the bucket with full force. Water went everywhere. The cone fell. The intern stepped back. Margaret jumped up, but it was too late. Uniform soaked, knees wet, supplies scattered across the floor. He looked her up and down. Faded blue uniform, grey hair tied with a rubber band, hands red from cleaning products, mid-50s, and a gaze that didn't apologize and didn't wait for one. And Caldwell, who had built a fortune knowing exactly what to say in any situation, said the wrong thing. "This is a federal courthouse, not a car wash. Get this mess out of my way before I have you fired." A prosecutor passing through the hallway looked away. An intern studied her own shoes with great interest. The security guard at the end of the corridor pretended not to hear. Margaret looked at him for a moment. No anger in her eyes, no tears, none of the expression of someone who has just been humiliated. Just that quiet look of someone who has seen too much to be surprised by this. Then she bent down slowly, picked up the bucket, collected the supplies from the floor. Caldwell had already turned the corner. She wrung the mop slowly, breathed, and thought 3 days. Comment right now, just the word courthouse if you already know what's coming. Let's see who figured it out. Margaret's phone vibrated at 12:43. She was alone at the corner table, sandwich in hand, blue uniform, rubber-soled shoes. She opened the message. Read it once, read it again, put the phone down on the Formica table, and stared at the wall for 32 seconds. Dear Dr. Margaret Cole, it is with great satisfaction that we communicate the unanimous approval of your appointment to the position of presiding judge of the 4th Federal Court. Your swearing-in ceremony is scheduled for tomorrow at 9 a.m. Your first case under jurisdiction begins on Monday. She finished her sandwich, washed her hands, picked up the mop, and went back to work. Arthur, the entrance security guard who had coffee with her every morning at 6, waved as she came through the main door. "See you tomorrow, Margaret." She stopped at the door, smiled at him with a warmth he had never quite understood, that calm of someone carrying something large and choosing not to show it. "See you tomorrow, Arthur." But tomorrow would be very different. The hall was full. Judges, prosecutors, attorneys, court staff. James Caldwell was in the second row with his team. New suit, new tie, new briefcase. Eyes on his tablet reviewing opening arguments for Monday. 142 cases, 0 defeats. He had no reason to pay attention to the ceremony. The murmur started at the back of the hall. Caldwell didn't look up from the tablet. The council president began speaking at the microphone. "It is with great satisfaction that we present the new presiding judge of the 4th Federal Court of this courthouse. 30 years of career. Former federal prosecutor with a historic conviction rate. Former substitute federal judge. Unanimously appointed by the Judiciary Council, Dr. Margaret Cole." Caldwell looked up, and the tablet nearly fell from his hand because he recognized the face immediately. The third-floor hallway. The bucket. The dirty water. The soaked uniform. "Get this mess out of my way before I have you fired." No expression. No smile, no coldness, no signal of any kind. Just that quiet look of someone who knows exactly what is happening and needs nothing more than that. She sat down. "Good morning, everyone," she said into the microphone. "It is an honor to be back in this courthouse. My first case begins on Monday." She opened the folder in front of her. Hartwell Pharma versus the state. Caldwell's name was on the first line as defense attorney. His stomach dropped completely. He intercepted her before she reached her chambers. Low voice, calculated tone. The same tone he used when he knew the ground was unstable, but needed to appear like it wasn't. "Judge Cole, congratulations on the appointment." She stopped, turned, and looked at him with exactly the same calm as the hallway the day before. "Thank you, Mr. Caldwell." 3 seconds of silence. "About yesterday," he began, "in the hallway, I was—" "In a hurry," she said, completing his sentence with a naturalness that completely disarmed him. "I know. I recognize an attorney before a major trial. The pressure is real." He couldn't tell if that was mercy or a warning. "I want you to know there won't be any personal circumstance affecting my handling of this case," he said, choosing each word as if drafting a contract. Margaret tilted her head slightly. "There won't be from mine either," she replied simply. "Because I judge the facts. I always judge the facts, Mr. Caldwell." She began walking. Until Monday. An intern approached for the first time in his career, not knowing what to say to his boss. Caldwell stared at the empty hallway, and for the first time in 11 years, he couldn't build the argument in his head. Because he knew the facts of the case. He knew the 42 patients. He knew the 5 who had died. He knew the documents Hartwell had chosen to hide. And he knew, with the precision of someone who had spent his entire life inside courtrooms, that Margaret Cole knew too. Share this with someone who needs to see this story today, and keep watching, because the best part is still coming. When Margaret Cole came through the side door, everyone rose. "Please be seated." She opened the folder, put on her glasses, swept the room with her eyes. Victims' families on the left side, some holding photographs. An older woman with her hands clasped in her lap who kept glancing at the clock. Hartwell's team on the right side. Expensive suits, trained expressions. Caldwell at the defense table. Grey suit this time, perfect posture. But his eyes, to anyone who knew how to read them, held something different. "Before we begin," Margaret said into the microphone, her voice filling the room without effort, "I want to make one thing absolutely clear to everyone in this room. This court is not a performance arena. It is not a place for arguments that protect corporate interests at the cost of human lives, and it is not a place for any strategy, no matter how expensive, how elaborate, how well-rehearsed, that prioritizes winning over truth." She looked directly at Caldwell. He didn't look away. "If any attorney in this room believes that their record outside this courthouse carries any weight inside it, I invite them to step out now." Nobody moved. "Then let's begin." Caldwell was extraordinary. She never denied that internally. Every argument arrived at the right moment. Every objection was surgical. Every witness came to the stand prepared for every possible question. In any other courtroom, in front of any other judge, it might have worked. But Margaret had known that game for 30 years, and every time he tried to shift the focus toward technical procedures, specific regulations, and favorable precedents, she did the same thing. Brought it back to the center. The 42 patients, the 5 who died, the documents Hartwell had chosen not to present. On the second day, when a defense witness began presenting data that contradicted the original clinical records, Margaret paused the session. "Mr. Caldwell, was this witness retained by Hartwell Pharma directly? There is a professional relationship, but yes or no?" "Yes, Your Honor." Witness dismissed. Testimony is disregarded. On the third day, when reports produced by a Hartwell partner laboratory were submitted as evidence, Margaret paused again. "Mr. Caldwell, does this laboratory hold an active contract with Hartwell worth $12 million annually?" "The documents are in front of me," she said. "I only need you to confirm." "Yes, Your Honor." Evidence disregarded. Margaret Cole looked at the jury, at the families at the defense table. This court has considered all evidence presented and all arguments from both sides. She turned to the last page of the decision. Hartwell Pharma is found guilty of deliberate omission of clinical data with direct impact on the deaths of 5 patients. The company will face civil and criminal accountability as determined by the prosecution. The victims' families will receive full reparation. The left side of the room collapsed. The older woman, who had been sitting with her hands clasped in her lap, began to cry silently. Beside her, a younger woman, her daughter probably, put her arm around her and closed her eyes. Caldwell sat still. Briefcase closed in front of him, eyes down, 142 cases. For the first time, defeat. He found her there, robe still on, folder under her arm, waiting for the elevator, the same hallway, the same spot where the bucket had fallen. Judge Cole. She turned, and he stood there for a long moment, the man who always had the right word, the perfect argument, the prepared response for every situation. "I was wrong," he said, "in the hallway and inside that courtroom for years, defending things I knew were wrong because I knew I could win." She looked at him carefully, not with satisfaction, not with coldness, with that same calm as always. "What are you going to do with that?" she asked. He didn't answer immediately. The elevator opened. Margaret stepped in. "You are too brilliant," she said before the doors closed, "to keep using it the wrong way." James Caldwell resigned from Hartwell 2 weeks later. He returned the case fees. 6 months later, he opened a small office. No reception desk, no interns, No name embroidered in gold letters on the glass door. Public interest cases, families without resources, cases nobody else wanted to take. His win rate dropped. He never came close to 0 defeats again. But the nights became easier to sleep through. Margaret Cole completed her first year as presiding judge with the highest approval rating that courthouse had seen in 2 decades. Arthur, the entrance security guard, still had coffee with her every morning at 6. Sometimes she walked through the 3rd-floor hallway, stopped at the same spot, looked at the floor, thought about the bucket, the soaked uniform, the voice that thought it was talking to nobody and kept walking, because she had always known what those days would reveal. She just needed to wait for the right moment. If you made it to the end, thank you. That tells me you are exactly the kind of person this channel exists for. Share this with someone who needs to hear that patience and character always go further than arrogance and money. Subscribe, and I'll see you in the next story, which is already ready and even more powerful than this one.